In this video, we're going to go over the Blender particle systems. And so in the properties editor, I'm in the particles tab. I could go ahead and click on plus. I could also have hit new. I could add more than one if I want, minus to remove a system. And you can expand this down if you have more stuff there by just dragging it. You can also turn it off from render, or you can turn it off from visible in the viewport by clicking those. You can use particle systems for lots of different things. I've actually used them to do trees in a setting, and I'll get into that later. We can use it for hair. We can also use it for rocket engine exhaust or whatever. We could do lots of different things with it. So right now I'm going to just go over kind of the emitter settings in this video. I might do another one with focus on hair particles and how you can use that in a later one. So down here in the emission section, if just setting up that particle thing, doing none of the settings, leaving everything at default, if I hit play, I get these particles just kind of raining down. And I can see that they're kind of vanishing as they go. And I'm going to shorten this to, actually I already did shorten it to 200 frames there. I'm just going to let it loop around as I change settings. You can change here the number of particles being generated. So I'm going to crank it up to almost 6,000 there. And you can overwhelm it, but in general, you're probably not going to do that, just kind of keeping it within like the 5,000, 6,000 range. And probably most cases, you don't need nearly as much. You can say what frame you want to start on. So if I lift that up and if I move this down, I can change the end frame. And by doing this, what you're going to do is you're going to get all the particles clumped more within a specific time range. So there you can see like those are much thicker as they left, and you can see that it shows just a red line there for where it actually did the calculations. You can also extend the life of the particles, so I can make these last 172 frames, so I can see them go much, much further. They don't like stop generating. You can also randomize it a little bit so that they disappear at different rates. Those are all kind of some different settings that you can use. If I say emit from volume, it'll be more of a mass clumped together versus vertices. They'll emit just from those edges as they come down, and then faces will emit from each of the separate faces of the cube. And kind of hard to see there as it goes what it's doing. If I move this back to 1, and let's say I take this one and move it to 5, and let's go back to the very beginning. And I missed it there. There we go. Okay, so if I look at this, I can see that there's 6 groups of the particles for the 6 faces. Usually what I do for a particle emitter is I do a square or I do a circle and just put it in there and use that to emit from. So that way it's just the front and back of the face emitting the particles. I think actually it's just the front of the face emitting the particles. So you can do also some things to like randomize it, play around with it, jitter. You can try all those different things out. If you're doing complex calculations, you can create a cache for it. Where it'll store that information, how many steps to cache, you can do that. And if I check the box that says external, I don't know why it goes down there, you can create a file path for it to record that data in, so that way you have it for future reference as well. Go ahead and hit, turn that off. There we go. And good. So, on here, what you can do is I'm going to go down to where it says velocity, and I'm going to shorten this down to, let's say, 150. Okay, so in the velocity section, these will change the initial velocity as they leave the object. So if I take normal and I increase that a lot, they'll shoot out in all different directions, and if it runs long enough, we can see how when starting to return back, when it hits the end, it starts over again. But if I let it play out longer, it would come back through. And so you can do things with that. You can also give it a direction to start off with and what it focuses on. So if I move this up, and if I move it up enough, right now I have the normal pretty high, so there it still goes down because the normal force is higher than that additional force. If I crank this up, now everything will go up, and the one going up all the way up will go really, really, really high as it shoots out. So that'll affect the velocity in those different directions. We go ahead and click on this and turn it back to just 1 here. And I'm going to take the normal and I'm just going to say 2. And there I get a little bit of it going that way. And when it starts, it goes up a little bit first and then falls down. We can also select on here random to kind of change up a little bit how that spreads out and goes. So there I have a nice random group that flies out. You can still almost see that they look very much like groups in a way, but they're much more dispersed. We can also play with things from object of how much it takes from the object that you're going to be using for the particles, which I'll get to in just a moment. In physics, I can say no physics, in which case they're just all there. And that's not really all that exciting, but there you go. Newtonian, which is what we were using, that would be normal physics. Keyed is, I haven't played around with that at all, but I imagine it deals with setting keyframes for the things. Voids is very different. It's where they all move a little bit differently and in different ways. I actually did a sample with a fish where I had a bunch of fish duplicates moving around using voids where they can travel around. And as you see, if I scroll down here, there's some very interesting settings you can do for under battle. You can do health, strength, aggression, accuracy, and I don't know exactly what any of these things really do per se, but you can play around with it, see if you notice anything there. I have them dissipating. I'm not sure if they're actually attacking each other or what, but that's the implication. So you can do different things to get them to work in different ways is basically what I'm saying. So there's also a fluid, which I don't know how that's any different than the Newtonian options, but Newtonian is probably what you want for most things. We can also affect their mass and play around with that setting. We can do different types of changes in those for affecting them. For rendering, right now it says halo, but as I was showing you before, I didn't really see anything there. If I click unborn, it'll show you the particles that haven't left the system yet, that haven't actually been emitted. So if I go and pause this, I go back, all the particles are there. If I start to go out, I can see them slowly leave the surface of it. A little bit more easy to tell if I actually add an object or something else there. Line, and I'll go ahead and just hit play on that. So we got rendering as line, as path. I think I haven't actually played with that either, so not sure exactly what the settings do, but if you want to experiment, there you go. Then you can teach me later. Object, for instance, if we do Shift A and let's go ahead and add a mesh, and let's do, let's go down to where we have torus objects. Let's do a torus knot, and for this torus knot, let's go ahead and select back on our cube. And we're going to click here, we're going to put in the torus knot. now all those objects are torus knots, and they're all falling. And if I take the size, I can adjust the size of the torus knots to what they should represent. And I can also adjust the randomness of the size so that they all are a little bit varied. And then we can also play around with how much they display. Children would be ones where they add more in there, and you notice everything just slowed down because it's doing 10 for every one that I had, and I already had a lot of them. Click on none. So I was playing around with the program earlier too, and I did a little bit of a setup where I added a force field vector in here where you do Shift A. You can go down to force field and you can choose different things. For this one I use vortex, and then once in the settings I actually increased the size of it where it says, actually let me make sure I'm on the right one. Okay. So I got the field there, and then I'm going to go to where it says size on that setting there, and you can increase it quite a bit. And so I get this going around, and I was noticing that I didn't intend to do this, but they're going really close to where that panel is, and they're actually going through it. If I click on this panel, and I go to the physics properties, this is where I can turn on collusion, and it's turning it on this panel, and now you can see I have some shearing off above and some shearing off below, and in fact my spiral looks quite a bit different than what it did in that last one. And so they're just kind of traveling, but again, there's lots of different ways that you can actually use these things in scenes and settings, and so we're going to get a little bit more into that in the next video, and then we'll talk about some other things that you can do in Blender that are kind of fun to try out and play with.